It's really become very important to me over the last year or so to really talk about my story with women. I think my journey is a little different than a lot of people's. I never got the chance to try to have a baby. So I am definitely childless, not by choice. To start kind of at the end, I had a hysterectomy when I was 35. I'm 41 now. I'm single. So again, not really getting the opportunity to try with a partner of choice. So essentially what led to me having my hysterectomy was that for years, going all the way back to, I would say even my earliest cycles when I was a little girl, I think I started my cycle when I was about 9 or 10. I never really had a normal cycle. It would come regularly, but it was extremely heavy. I don't remember ever having a time when I didn't have cramps or heavy bleeding. But doctors always assured me it was normal. My mother had the same kind of thing. My grandmother had the same sort of symptoms. And so there was no point where anyone said, hey, this isn't normal. Let's take a look and see what's going on. So I went through all the way through. I remember in high school, I used to play sports, and I would have to, whenever I had my cycle, I would have to wear 2 pads at the same time because I was bleeding so heavily and I wouldn't necessarily be able to make it to a bathroom before I would have an accident, so to speak. So I've never had a normal cycle. I've never gotten to experience that except for the fact that it came on a regular basis. But as I got older, my cycle got more severe. I got to the point where I was essentially at least 1 to 2 days out of the month, either A, in extreme pain, or B, in so much pain that I couldn't leave the house. I would have to take kind of reserve sick days from work to be able to stay home. Or if I went to work, I was barely productive because I was in so much pain. I was having to take massive amounts of painkillers to be able to function normally just to kind of get through the day. And on top of that, I was also bleeding extremely heavily. And it seemed as the older I got, the heavier my cycles got. So it wasn't just that I hit this point where I said, okay, this is not a normal cycle. It was an ongoing kind of lifelong thing where every year it seemed like my cycle would get heavier. So when I got into my 30s and I was dating, I had a long-term partner, not necessarily headed toward marriage, but a long-term partner. I remember I used to say to him, like, can you just push into my stomach and he would feel kind of almost a knot in where my uterus should be. And it would only be when I was sleeping, I would have cramps so bad that the only way to kind of ease the pain would be for him to put his fist, not like a punch, but just the pressure of having a fist into my uterus. And he kind of would say, I can feel throbbing. That's not normal, is it? And, he's a man. He doesn't know. I certainly had never experienced anything but that, although I had all these friends who said, I feel great. I have minor cramps and I take some Advil and I feel great. That was never my experience. So I started over the years, I think in my early was that I was starting to look pregnant. Obviously I wasn't, I knew I wasn't, but I was starting to look pregnant. I was bleeding, but I had this huge lump in my stomach. So during one of my gynecologist appointments, the gynecologist said, you're right, this isn't normal. Never mind that it had taken almost 33, 34 years to get there. She said, this isn't normal. You're right. Something's wrong. So they did an ultrasound, both the external and then the internal transvaginal. And I had huge fibroids and they had likely been growing for years. It's hard to say when they would have started growing. It would be hard to say if I had had them from childhood or my teenage years, but I definitely had huge fibroids. I, at that point, like I said, had no long-term partner. I didn't think I was going to get married. I was uncomfortable with the idea of being a single mother. So I was in this really kind of confusing position of, well, okay, what do I do here? And the options were pretty much, you have a hysterectomy or you go on Lupron, and Lupron just provides, I guess, hormonal menopause. So when I went back to the doctor, I said, I don't think I'm comfortable with this. What are my other options? And she essentially said, well, they're too big to give you a myomectomy. So you're going to have a hysterectomy. I was 34, I think, when they told me I was going to have a hysterectomy. And I had my hysterectomy, like I said, when I was 35. And really, it was an interesting experience because all the conversations were about, I remember one of the doctors saying to me, well, what are you going to do about your husband? I don't have a husband. I can't make decisions about my fertility based on a man that doesn't exist. So it has been really interesting to have these conversations because I have this hysterectomy. I can't have children. And the real reason for my hysterectomy, in addition to the fibroids, was that the fibroids were so large that they caused my uterus to be misshapen. So essentially that shape that we all know, the kind of upside down triangle sort of shape, mine looked kind of like this, to use my hands as the best possible thing. And there was no way to get it back to normal. It had been distorted so greatly that there was nothing to really repair it. So even if I had kept my uterus and had just had the myomectomy, I likely would have never been able to carry a child. So there were kind of lots of questions on the table from doctors, from nurses. Oh, well, what does your husband think? And what are you going to do about dating? And to this day, it's been 6 years. I still don't know what I'm going to do about dating. And in terms of the psychological side of things, that really is, I think, for me, where a lot of that comes into play, because I made this huge life decision that most people at least are either A, making with a partner, or B, are making kind of in a different set of circumstances. I didn't really get a choice about what to do. I didn't get to try for a child. The subject of freezing my eggs came up, but at 35, 36 years old, I hadn't planned for that. I didn't have the money for that. I didn't have the time to figure out how to make the money for that magically appear. So there were just a lot of things that flew at me really, really quickly. And I didn't necessarily have the time to make decisions the way I would make them for anything else in my life. Normally you do your research and you kind of look at your options, and then based on what your situation is, you make the best decision. But I didn't really get that. I got to basically say, all right, I'm having this hysterectomy. And I remember the day or maybe 2 days before my hysterectomy, I called my doctor and canceled it. I had a panic attack. I thought about how hard dating would be. I thought about how I remember thinking to myself, no one is ever going to want me. No one is ever going to want me. In the Black community, men always want kids, and no one's ever going to want me. So I panicked and I called my doctor and I said, I don't want to do this. Never mind. And thankfully, my doctor was a Black woman, and she said, look, I know what you're worried about, but your health matters. You're not okay. You're bleeding. At that point, I was bleeding every day, all day, to some degree above light. It wasn't light spotting. It was heavy bleeding every day. So up to now, that's where I am. I don't even know that I necessarily call it an infertility journey, because I don't know that there was a journey. It was sort of something that happened in the space of a few years that led to a very concrete decision. There was no starting point. It was just sort of an end point for me. So now the comments I usually get are questions about adoption and foster and all of those things. But again, I don't know that I want to be a single mother. I don't know that I have the support system needed to adopt or foster a child. I'm still single, very much single. So there are lots of things that I don't necessarily feel are open to me, but I don't necessarily also feel the need to share that with people the first time we talk. So I think for me, in terms of the psychological impact, it's almost like I'm hiding a part of myself, because, people casually talk about their kids, their husbands, and all of those things. And then I'm sitting at the table kind of twiddling my thumbs, and people say, well, what about you? And I don't have kids, and I want to leave it at that. But often at 41, people say, how are you don't have kids and you're single? How did that happen? So I think for me, it's become almost a shameful thing where I don't necessarily want to tell everybody, oh, well, my uterus didn't work, so I can't have them. But it's almost like a necessity. I'm almost forced to tell people that so that they'll leave me alone and stop asking me why I don't have kids. So that's where I am now. I'm at this point where I do feel a little bit more of a need to be vocal about it, because it's, at least in the South where I am, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, women really value being a mom and being a wife. And so I feel very compelled to tell my story and to be more open about it, even though I don't necessarily want to, just to normalize it, because people are so shocked when they hear that you don't have kids. So I think that's kind of my journey in a nutshell.
I'm Kristen Woodman, and I'm 31 years old. I live in the northern part of Oklahoma City, and it is a pleasure to come to you. This has become such a huge passion over the last 3.5 years to share my infertility story. We've been on this journey. My husband and I have been married 4.5 years. And so our fertility journey started when he got his reversal vasectomy, our first year of marriage. My husband is a little bit older and he has 3 kids of his own. So we went and did the reversal vasectomy, and our journey started 3 or 4 months after that surgery. And I started to track everything. I've never been somebody that's really tracked. I was on birth control for a really long time, so that kind of tracked for me. But I started doing pee sticks and an app just to see how regular I was, because that wasn't something that I've ever tracked before. And about 2.5 years in, we had 0 success. And we had decided that we were going to seek counsel once we moved here in Oklahoma City in 2019. And so in September of 2019, we sought after a fertility clinic here in the city, and they had guided us to do IUI. And so our first round was in October, and I was on Clomid, and our first round was unsuccessful. And then November, we had a successful pregnancy. But unfortunately, we had lost the baby at like 7.5 weeks. And then we had a really hard time. I bled for a really long time. So we weren't able to actually start another round of IUI until the end of January of 2020. And that was another failed round. February, I ovulated too quickly. So we're not able to try in February. And coming into March I had told my husband that this was going to be our last try, because background about me, and one thing, the psychological impact that I've had with fertility is I was diagnosed at 18 with anxiety and depression. It's a long history in my family. So the synthetic hormones, the Clomid, was just wreaking havoc on my mental health, let alone just the whole journey itself is so consuming, and everything is so centered around, your cycle. And so I told my husband, I was like, this is gonna be our last try for a while. And we were unsuccessful, which was very, very heartbreaking for us, because it was the best numbers that both of us had. We have unexplained infertility, so it is not something, we don't know what's wrong. My husband's numbers are great. I reacted very, very well to the medication. So end of March, we had decided that was it. We were going to be done. And then obviously with the pandemic hitting, that was another obstacle. So around May of 2020, we had discussed doing IVF. And so we had a consultation, and it was 60 days behind. So we had started our IVF journey in July of 2020. And the birth control that I was on for IVF made me terribly sick, and just fatigued. I was in bed all day long. Really, I only had enough energy to work out in the morning, and then that was about it. I was in bed most of the day. So, and then we started our actual shots and everything in August. And I felt a little bit better than I did with the Clomid, but my body, again, responded extremely well. We were very, very hopeful. They extracted 40 follicles, and of those 40, 16 were mature. But unfortunately, we only had 4 that made it after they did ICSI. So they did ICSI with my husband because he had a reversal. And so we had 2 that were a really good grade, and 2 that they said were not going to make it to implant. And I had some complications with the IVF because of how many follicles they had retrieved. I was at a high risk for hyperstimulation. And so we had discussed going frozen embryo transfer or a warm embryo transfer. And so we did the warm transfer because we had 2 eggs. That was our only shot. So, and unfortunately it did not take. And so we were just so devastated. We were as devastated as when we lost our baby. So we have decided since then that just because of the mental struggles that I have had, that we would no longer pursue treatment. And it was kind of heartbreaking and upsetting, because I'm not somebody that likes to give up, but the kind of mental the struggles I had mentally were just something that I had to walk away from. So we have, in the last couple months, decided that we are just going to, if we are okay with it just being us. I know I'm young, and I know that, it can happen, it can still happen, but we've just accepted it just because of the mental struggles that I've had and the amount of depression that it had put me into, that we were just going to be okay with us just being us and his 3 kids and our 2 dogs. And so we have started this childless, not by choice type of journey. And so I'm really not excited, but just hopeful to be able to be a voice and just be able to educate other women, whether they're childless, not by choice, whether they're starting their fertility journey, or, they're long due past, or they even have kids, just be a platform to be able to share just the overall struggles that we have as women that are going through this journey.
Hello, my name is Briea Peace. I'm 33 years old and I am born and raised, still live in Southern California. Um, my infertility journey, I don't know, I just feel like it was a pretty sudden start. My husband and I started trying to conceive in August of 2016 after my teaching credential cleared. That was like the goal, like, okay, get your teaching credential and then we can start trying. And so I got my credential in July of 2016, and then then we started trying in August. So we kind of started wondering what was taking so long. But I just thought like maybe we're not being consistent with the trying part. And it took us to figure out like when we were supposed to be trying, like when in the month, because that's not always explained well. So so we tried for about 2 years and it wasn't that consistent, but I would say like overall about 2 years. And it wasn't until January of 2018 when I had a cycle of 39 days that I thought, oh, I think something's wrong here. I actually did think I was pregnant because it's a long cycle. I'm usually pretty regular, 27, 28, and then boom, right on schedule. And I've never been on birth control before. Nothing hormonal, nothing like that. I didn't want to do it, so I didn't. Um, So it was really bizarre to me that I had a cycle that long. Um, I took pregnancy tests. They were all negative, and I just couldn't figure out why. And so um, I think I want to say in March or April of 2018, I finally decided to make an appointment at at the fertility clinic that my insurance is associated with. And we couldn't get in until August. So I was kind of sitting there for 5 months, hoping that we would get pregnant and I wouldn't need to go, or, doing research. It was all just so foreign. Like nobody in my immediate family had trouble having children. So I was just very confused about why we were having so much trouble. So um, on August 27th, of 2018, we went into the doctor and we had a consultation with her. She took blood tests from both of us, and both of our results came back with very low numbers. Um, for me specifically, because I don't want to tell all my husband's business, but for me specifically, it was a low anti-Mullerian hormone, which is the hormone that tells you the quality and the quantity of the eggs that you have. The normal number is above like a 2.5 or a 3, and I had a 2.05, but they like to see close to 10 for egg quality and egg quantity. So it was pretty low. Um, and the doctor was basically telling me like that I'm perimenopausal. And at the time, I was 30 years old receiving that news. So it was very difficult. And I remember asking her, well, what causes this? Is it reversible? Can I do something or take something to get those numbers up? Because for men, the sperm count, it can, like, that's reversible. Like it can be fixed. And so for some cases. So, and she told me like, nope, it's not reversible. And so I remember asking her like, well, what caused it? And she said, well, a lot of times when women, when girls start their period before age 11, um, into perimenopause. And so I was actually 9 when I got my period. So, and I found out that there are a couple other women in my family, like older, like not in their 90s or so, that had the same thing going on. They never had kids. It was never explained. They just couldn't. The thing that we had in common is starting a period super early. So it's all very tough. But after that doctor's appointment, the doctor back in 2018, the doctor put me on Clomid, and I did that for 6 months. And Clomid does not make you feel mentally stable. I just felt like a crazy person every month. I felt like I could smell pregnant women, if that makes sense. Like your radar for people that have what you want is just so high. And it was just like a constant reminder of not being able to have kids. Sometimes it's hard to talk about the psychological effects of not being able to have kids. It's so difficult to explain that you feel like you hate your body. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. I experienced like just high levels of jealousy and judging other people, like, well, what did you do to deserve kids? And it's not even about that, but I just, emotionally, sometimes you go there. So I have been to a couple of baby showers. I didn't do so well. Just, crying afterwards because I kept thinking, this is never going to be me. No one's ever going to celebrate me having a kid because it's not going to happen. But something else that's a little more tangible is like when I find out about pregnancy announcements, there's been some times where I have purchased a gift and just left it on the doorstep because I'm not in a place where I want to hear about the pregnancy or see the excitement on the person's face because I'm like emotionally, I'm not in a place where I can match it. But I do want to. There's a verse that says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. And so I want to be able to rejoice with those who rejoice. Right now, it's very robotic. I would like the emotions to follow one day, but right now, they're just not there. But I'm trying. And that looks like me purchasing a little something, putting it on the doorstep, and going home. And just hoping that they can see that I'm trying to love them.
For Briea, I totally relate to that feeling of envy and jealousy, especially at baby showers. I thought by now at 41 I'd be on the other side of everybody having babies, but clearly I'm not. And I definitely still, it's not, the envy has kind of trailed off a little bit, but it still does sometimes. I'm still sometimes look at people and I say, well, why you and why not me? I don't know that ever goes away completely. I think there's a version of it. I do think for me, it's gotten easier over the years, having been 34, 35 when I had to kind of turn the corner and process all of this. But I totally relate to that. Even now when we have baby showers at work, sometimes I sit in the corner and I just kind of hide my face and hope that nobody asks me when it's, because I get a lot. I know women always say, oh, you're next. No, I'm not. And I've definitely had some moments with people where I've had to set that firm boundary. No, I'm not next. Stop saying it. Please respect this boundary. But it does get, the emotion changes. I don't know that it's envy anymore. It's more of a kind of matter of fact thing, but I relate to it heavily of being in that situation where all you can do is, here's the gift and I love you, congratulations, and I'm getting the heck out of here. It's not an unusual feeling. I totally relate to that.
Yeah, I had went to one of my really good friends shortly, probably about a month after our failed IVF. And that was she's a really good friend. So I really tried I'm very good at compartmentalizing my feelings. It's been something I've been working on. So for me, it's kind of been opposite of like, I have to feel it. That's been something that's really hard is I've gotten it, like it's been overwhelming in times, but at her shower afterwards, I could totally feel it. And I hadn't allowed myself to really grieve the process, but, you know, just communicating with your friends that trying to help them understand of like, I thought I could do this, but I can't. And sometimes they might take it personally. Like one of my best friends had her second baby throughout the like shortly after we had started IVF treatment. And it was just something that I couldn't bring myself to be happy for her. It's changed now, but in the midst of it, I totally relate to you. And then Dina, I just admire your strength. I think it's awesome, you know, that you're just so strong with it. And I'm really glad that you're outwardly sharing it, because childless not my choice. That was not even something that your kind of story, even something that was on my radar, you know? So I'm really glad I got to meet you today. And I just really admire your strength. And I hope that if I'm in your shoes at 41 without kids, that I'm as strong as you are. So I just think it's awesome.
Thank you. That's kind of why I got into this kind of the community itself on a larger scale, because I didn't, even my gynecologist, they have support groups for everything else, people who are pregnant, people who are, you know, going through fertility treatments, but they couldn't tell me who to talk to because they didn't know anyone else who was older, single, and making that decision at that moment. So at this point, I think it's important for people to see that we exist, because I think a lot of us just don't talk about it. We kind of hide in the corner, and everybody in the family knows, oh yeah, I've got that aunt over there who doesn't have any kids, and we don't know why she doesn't have them. So that's kind of how I got here, is that I didn't have anyone to talk to, because clearly my mom had me. So she didn't relate to that. My grandmother had my mother, so she didn't relate to that either. And I don't know that we have any aunts in our family who don't have kids. So there really wasn't anybody even remotely close to me who I could talk to about it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I have a family that they want kids and they get kids. I have one cousin out of my whole family that struggled, but they had a successful IVF. And that was, I mean, she understood as far as the psychological and physical and just the aftermath of everything that those hormones happen. Because I'm actually going through hormone therapy now from the long-term effects of those synthetic hormones. And so that's been the last 6 months have been a really big struggle of, why do I still feel like I'm on hormones, you know? And so I actually just got my treatment plan this morning with trying to balance out my body. And that was something that I'm sure you can relate to with, you know, going through menopause early. That's something that I did not even think that was going to happen to me. You know, I think we think that the baby is the end term, but if we don't get one, what do our bodies look like afterwards? So I think that's been my biggest struggle since everything has been like just making havoc on my body. I mean, I've been in the fitness industry a very long time, so I always question that as well. But for me to be a trainer and work with women like us, it's been really hard not being able to mentally be there all the time, you know?
Having this online community is really helpful, because before I mean, it all starts on Instagram, right? But before finding this community, I didn't know anyone who couldn't have kids. I mean, there's a few ladies at church that couldn't, and so I was able to relate to them for a little while, and then they had kids. And so now it's like, you know, they don't quite remember or didn't have to wait as long. So it's very isolating sometimes.
Yeah.
And people think like, oh, like you'll get over it. Like you'll get over it soon. Like, but nope, it's still happening. It's been,
Yeah.
Almost 5 years. We've been married for almost 7 years.
Yeah. My mom actually said something to me probably about 6-7 months ago. And she goes, I thought you'd be over it by now, like my miscarriage. And I said, I don't think that people who don't struggle with infertility realize that it's a monthly reminder that we don't have kids, you know? Yeah. And so something that really brought to my attention to be more proactive about sharing it is that we'll always grieve this. It'll always be something that we experience loss, even if it's 10 years, 15 years, or down the road, it will always experience loss every month. So that was I think in December, my 1 year mark, that's when I was like, okay, I have to start sharing more. Because even my mom was like, well, I thought you did through this. Yeah. So I think that's a big one, is that people don't realize that it's going to be a never ending journey.
And I think people don't realize random things trigger you. Like, I'm at a point, because I'm further down, the journey or the road, where I can go to events and be the only person there without a child. And I distinctly remember I was at they kind of had like I guess you could say it was a wedding shower, their reception, they eloped. So they did all of it all at once. They had a housewarming, all of it all at once. And everybody there had kids except for a few other people. But the other people who didn't have them were people who just weren't ready for them yet. They hadn't even thought about trying. And I'm a person who I taught preschool. So I love kids. And I'm always the person who's carrying the kids and playing with the kids. And everybody's, oh, you're so great with kids. Oh my God, I can't wait to see you with them. And now I'm in the bathroom sobbing because and everyone's like, well, what happened? Is she drunk? Why is she acting like this? But you never know what is going to suddenly flip that switch and change you and completely change where your head is at. I was fine. And then someone said, you would be such a great mom. I can't wait to see you with kids. I don't know you well enough to tell you that I can't have them. So I just have to sit here and nod and smile awkwardly and go in the bathroom and cry. Yeah. It's I think the more of us who talk about it, the more aware of it people become. But people really don't think about, it's almost the default setting is women have babies. And if you don't have one now, you'll have one later. It's fine.
Have you ladies experienced like your friendships of like, I have really close friends that have 2 to 4 kids now. Do you feel like friendships have changed? Because in my mind, I kind of feel like my friendship, the dynamic has changed a little bit of like, I don't know if it's because they know I'm going through an infertility journey. So they almost like, I'm not as invited anymore, if that makes sense. Like, do you feel like, I feel like it's changed my friendships a little bit because they want to be sensitive to the fact, but then it comes across insensitive because you're not invited. Like, does that make sense?
I think I get it from both because I'm single and I don't have kids. So I got that initial thing that happens when everybody else is married and you're not. And you're the single friend and your life is still different just because you don't have that one person that you go home with. And then when everybody had kids too, it was almost like a second round of that same feeling of, well, we want to be sensitive and we don't want you to be the only one who doesn't have this. Well, okay, well, I don't have a husband, I don't have kids. So when are you going to invite me somewhere? Yeah. Thankfully, because people know I like kids, they're a little more likely to invite me to things because they know I do have friends who are child-free by choice and they don't want to be around children. At least with me, I think my friends are aware. If they say, hey, can I bring my daughter or my son? Yeah, bring them. I don't care. They're funny. I think they're fun to play with. So it's fine. But there is a dynamic that has definitely changed as it's become concrete to them that, oh, she's not going to adopt either. She's not going to join the club and do the thing that the rest of us are doing. I think there's definitely
I definitely feel a shift as friends are having kids. Like I said, I go to church. I'm pretty active. I'm actually the nursery director at my church. So I'm like one of the first people to find out when there's a new influx of babies that are coming. And I love babies. And and people ask me like, well, why are you still in the nursery if it's so hard for you? And I'm like, this is the only chance that I have to hold a baby. But going back to the question, definitely. And I think the shift is that I don't want to hear moms talking about their kids' milestones. And it's because it makes me so incredibly sad. And a couple of people have actually asked me, is this bothering you that I'm talking about this? And like, but a lot of people don't ask, they just keep talking about it. But these 2 people asked me, and it's because they could like visually see me like checking out to protect myself. And I was just like, dang, like I must be really having a hard time if they can see my eyes glazing over because I don't want to hear it. And it's not that I don't care, it's that it hurts. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I definitely feel myself distancing from women that have kids.
So I think that, I guess the thing that strikes me most of all is it's so obvious watching when the three of you were able to talk with each other. You're just so keen to talk. You can just see how much you needed to talk to each other and how powerful that was. And this is what this does. People who are watching this and you talking to each other and people who have the courage to speak up about how hard this is, you are changing the world by doing this and helping each other as well as people watching this know that you're not alone and that there's all kinds of diversities out there in terms of what people do with their reproductive capacity or they don't do, or their experiences with fertility. And, it's, learning how do you feel? What do you say? Um, it's amazing to me, Kristen, that you thought that in 5 or 6 months that you would be at some point. You said something like you're still not there yet. And as you said later on, this is like a lifelong journey, although I think it becomes a lot less painful. But I always conceptualize people, all of you, that you're going through your life's journey, and to provide for this organization that Joby has founded to be a special place for people who are involuntarily childless. But in any case, for all of you to have this special place to help you figure out how you proceed in your particular journey in safety, it's very, very important work. So you're all brave and your voices will carry. And anyway, I'm going to be quiet now because I think perhaps you have some questions. And I also wanted to give you a couple of resources, which you may already have, but you never know. So would you like to ask me a question?
I guess my question is, how did Dr. Malavé get into this particular area of psychology? Because it's so rare to find somebody that specializes in this, in infertility.
Well, I
Yes.
I think this is one of the most important areas in a person's life. You know, what you're going to do about the family building question. It's something that I find incredibly moving and very important. And I'm very familiar with all the people who are suffering in this area. It's 1 in 6 people who go through infertility. And that's not even talking about having access to fertility, having experiences such as you've described, Dina, where you kind of, stop before you get out of the gate, so to speak. And it tends to be an area that people get really stuck in. I like to say it's like falling down a deep hole on your journey and not being able to get out of it. And very often, I'd say always actually, people need help. Now, this is what you're doing with each other right now. And as far as I can tell, what Joby is providing is like a peer help. You're not professionals, but you're helping each other. So that's one way that people can help each other. And another way is by seeking help with a professional. So you can write this down if you like. I am, as I said, part of the mental health professional group of the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. So if you Google mental health professional group of A as in Apple, S as in Sam, R as in Robert, M as in Mary, that'll get you through to the homepage, the web page of that organization. That is the group in this country that manages everything to do with family building, including people who are having all kinds of issues with fertility. It's the umbrella group within the medical umbrella group. On that web page, there's a directory where you should be able to find anybody in a particular area, because you have to, if you're going to work with someone professionally, they have to be licensed in the state that you live in. So, and then also on that same web page, there is a bookshelf with reading material. There's only 4 entries I checked yesterday for child-free, but there's a lot of different categories that might be helpful to you. So that's, I'd say, the main thing I would suggest. There's also this Resolve, the National Infertility Association, and they have peer groups and professional groups, and that's just under resolve.org. So that may be a place where you might prefer a peer group. Some people don't, prefer the peer experience, or a professional group that way. So I like to conceptualize it like a journey, like you're going along, and there's a turn that says no longer possible, and you're beyond that, and there are other options, but at that point they may not be for you. And I think, by the way, that's a way that you could get into talking to people. By the way, Dina, you said when people say something, if people say, why don't you just adopt? People always say, why don't you just adopt? But, I think the best thing is to say, adoption's a great option. And I've thought about it, but you know what? It's not the right fit for me. Something like that. I think that, but anyway, we could talk more about what you say. But so I hope that's answered that question. I think very highly of Resolve, mental health professional group. Anybody who's a member there really knows this stuff up, down, and sideways. So that, that's a good resource. I hope that's helpful. That was what Briea asked, right? Other questions? Oh, some strategies. Okay, Joby's written to me. Can you give me some strategies that can be used to heal from infertility, trauma, and grief? Well, as they say, this is a little bit like preaching to the choir, because you're already doing some of the strategies, and you, by putting yourselves forward like this, you have this like mini little support group that you just had, and you see how felt like you could have gone on and on and on, right? Because you need to talk about it. So strategies are, one strategy is you need to have people to talk to about it. It might be people you meet, such as each other. It might be a close friend that really is willing to listen and learn and not tell you to stay calm or move, get over it already. Somebody who really listens. Could be a professional counselor or a therapist. Resources such as looking up this website, the Tutum Global, reaching out for that. So you're already doing things, you're reaching out, you're talking about it. All of you mentioned that. So I think these are successful strategies. I think having realistic expectations, this is a huge area. There's grief, it becomes trauma. You have to allow that to breathe. You have to give some time to feel the feelings. You have to be able to grieve. You have to be able to mourn. So that's very important. At the same time, and here we are in the middle of a global pandemic, for heaven's sakes, and no matter what anybody's existing vulnerability, and you've been very open, Kristen, you mentioned, and Dina, I think, some underlying vulnerability, and everybody's vulnerable to this pandemic, but some people more than others. It's terribly important that you don't, I like to say, disappear down a rabbit hole with it. You don't want to kind of go into your grief and feel like you're going to drown with it. So a good strategy could be something as simple as setting your phone, and letting yourself sit in an easy chair for a few minutes and think about the most awful things you can think about just for a few minutes, and have a good cry, and then do something, get up and do something mindless. I like to say sort the laundry, something like that. Do some dishes, make the bed, make up a laundry list, something that doesn't require much brain matter, but something that breaks that cycle so you don't disappear. I'm sure you all know what I mean by disappearing in a hole of grief. Mm-hmm. If you have faith, if you have a religious faith, that can be enormously helpful, but you need to have some people who get it. Doesn't even have to be that many people. And you have to be kind to yourself and use this as a time to grow some strength, to grow, because although this is an awful thing to go through, you can develop resilience, strength, something called post-traumatic growth. You know, you can come out of it stronger as a person, and you can come out of it a more compassionate person, because there's all kinds of awful things that people go through in life. And even though they may be going through a different kind of awful experience, when you've gone through something really, really profound, like you all have, it does have the potential to connect you to other people. You can kind of relate to, well, I didn't go through what they went through, but gee, I went through some pretty hard times and I'm still going through it. So that's terribly, terribly important. So self-care, being kind, connecting to others rather than separating from others, and finding people who will listen and not try and fix you. I could go on, but I hope that's helpful. Other questions?
I do have a question. So one of the most common feelings that I felt throughout the 18 months that we went through IUI and IVF was loneliness. You know, even loneliness within my own marriage. Because you work with couples. I've been seeing a therapist for a year now, and it's very tremendously helpful. It's been helpful throughout this whole journey. But one of the things that I feel that I could do a better job of, or have some strategies of, because a lot of, at least in my marriage, and I can't speak for everyone, is my husband knows how hard it was on my body. And so it's primarily almost been my decision, I feel like sometimes, to not pursue any more treatment. And he's totally supportive of it because it was really hard. But what are some strategies that can make this whole journey more less lonely and a little bit more cohesive with a spouse? I'm not sure if that's a normal feeling in a marriage, but I know for me that I just felt like it was all on me. And I didn't want to burden him a lot with some of the stuff. And then part of it, he just didn't understand. So my question is, what are some strategies that can make those of us who are going through it with a spouse more cohesive, I guess, to where they understand what we're going through?
Okay, that's a very good question. And it's everybody has that question. It's kind of is what it is. So I'm going to answer it, but I'm going to try and answer it in a way that doesn't just talk about couples, that talks about single people like Dina, like what you're going through, okay? So first of all, if you do have, if you're in a heterosexual relationship and you have a man in your life, men and women cope with this very differently. You know, for quite a number of years, it was thought that men didn't really hurt them as much, you know, didn't really affect them. And I think we know a lot more now that they're not socialized to talk and, you know, share intimacies and talk about feelings. It does affect them, but they deal with it differently. You know, women get all active and talk about it and research it and, you know, on Facebook and this, that, the other. Men tend to distance and throw themselves into work. So it often looks to women like they don't care or that they're not involved. And that's not really what's going on. In my description of life's journey, where the woman falls down a pothole, I like to say usually the guy's down there in another pothole, or the same pothole, and they can't see each other. They feel divided. But what I think is really, and yes, loneliness. And of course, going back to the pandemic, this is a terrible time of loneliness for so many people. But yes, going through what you've all been going through is a very lonely experience. So whether or not this is your partner, your husband, your partner, or your close friend, back to Dina and the single people, I think the most helpful thing I can say is, and in Resolve we call the hallmark of infertility or fertility challenges the loss of control. Loss of control. And with loss of control comes incredible feelings of helplessness. Helplessness. So this is particularly difficult for men because they're socialized to fix things. They're socialized to be strong and make everything better. So when you're suffering, your partner or your close friend, and it could be male or female, they're feeling incredibly helpless, which is an awful feeling, to feel that somebody you love is suffering and you can't, it's like perhaps one of the most awful things. So this is why people end up saying dumb stuff, at least in my opinion. It's some of the times it's for the, I don't know, other reasons, but a lot of times it's because people don't know what to say. They feel they should do something, they should say something, you know, and so they often say the thing which feels like the wrong thing. But sometimes if you're saying that you're seeing a therapist, sometimes, and I can't speak because I haven't met your husband and I don't know what your therapist has recommended or whatever, but sometimes men accompany women into therapy, and sometimes if somebody says to them, you're not doing it for them, you're doing it for you, and that, you know, to help you, sometimes it's a little easier for them to step in the door. More women go to therapy than men for the most part, gay men being exception. But so it's, you know, it's uncomfortable. But I think understanding that that other person is feeling incredible helplessness and they may be handling it differently. So you may not be far apart like you think you are.
Mm-hmm.
And even with Dina, with some of your close friends, you know what I mean? The same thing goes on. They may be saying something like, why don't you just adopt, or whatever else it is, or, you know, they don't know what to do. So they say something. And if you kind of understand that you know, they're feeling helpless, they're seeing you suffering, and they want to make it better. So I think even understanding that, I think it's unrealistic personally to expect guys to suddenly be like completely different. I think it depends on the guy. Some guys can learn how to talk about their feelings, and some just, you know, once they start, they just like never stop and they take to it and it's great, but not everybody. And not for that, and for that matter, some women aren't particularly into talking about feelings either. We all have them, but you have to kind of translate what the other person is saying. If somebody says, you know, you want to watch TV right now, it might not mean shut up and don't talk about it. It might mean, I don't know what else to suggest. Let's be together. Let's kind of, you know, try and keep going. You have to kind of translate and have a more benign translation, because it's very easy when things aren't communicated, or even when they are, quite frankly, it's very easy to misunderstand where the other person's coming from and feel rejected or feel even more alone. And you have to translate it, because it's like we're all familiar that some people never say sorry, right? They never say sorry, but they do sorry. They do sorry. You have to translate, well, I guess that's the best I'm going to get from them. That's a sorry. They're just not going to say the word sorry, right? It's kind of like that. Like, you know, kind of try and translate what your guy or what your friend, you know, may be coming from. They presumably want you to feel better and, you know, want to be supportive. But it's hard when somebody's looking like they're in a bottomless pit of grief, you know, it's really hard to know what to do, and it's hard for people to just listen. You might want to say, just listen, but if they're just listening, then they feel like they're doing nothing. So it's hard. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Okay, other questions?
On a similar note, how would you recommend navigating kind of in the workplace, or kind of not with your friends, but people who are a little further away from being able to have these conversations? When, like, I know for me, I work in an office when it's not the pandemic, and people are very quick to say, oh, you're the next one in line to have a baby, or, you know, things like that. How do you navigate kind of, I don't know, communicating or setting boundaries around those things? Because it's very awkward to sit there and just sort of nod and smile, but you also don't necessarily want to say, hey, I can't have kids, to people that are, you know, in your workplace.
I think that's a very good question, and it's really a difficult situation of being put on the spot. And I think that you have to think about what is it you want, you know, a little bit like, what do you want to communicate? How much do you want to share of your experience, and not feel like you have to kind of like roll over and just hide it again. But at the same time, you don't want to invite a whole bunch of questions. I'm very fond of saying that people need to learn additional social skills in managing all of this. So, but I think basically, bottom line, you've got to have some comebacks. You've got to realize that people are going to say the things they're going to say, and they say it because who knows what, people say stuff. You know, we can predict what they're going to say, you know? So you know that they're going to say it. So you need to find some comebacks that feel comfortable. So it might be, not everybody has a child, you know, or, you know, there's many roads, you know, we have diversity in family building, you know, some people are a family of one, you know, or, you know, I think what often happens is people get so upset and they shut down, and then they get so angry that they end up bursting out with something at a time which alienates people and probably isn't terribly helpful. So I think you have to think a little bit, what is it you want to accomplish? You know, are these people that, you know, depending on your workplace, you know, is it better for you, more comfortable for you in your personality and your life, that you may just say, you know, I'm not going to get into it at work, let them say that, ha ha ha, you never know, or, you know, just sort of chit chat, and then make sure that in other areas of your life you're more honest and open? Or do you want to kind of say something that feels like you're being true to yourself? Like, for example, you know, when I heard from with Joby, she used the word involuntarily childless women. Now that says it all. Involuntarily childless. It's like a statement. It's like, and people have the right to define themselves and identify themselves any way they like. But that's a statement that says, I did not want this. This happened to me. That I'm using that because it kind of like is sending a message. And you might want to send a message at work. You might want to do it on the light side, depending on what your personality is like. And, you know, we're so this is a point in history where, you know, other than the 60s, there's finally some recognition of different kinds of diversity and the value of diversity of different kinds now. So you might seize on that. Like I said, you might say something like, you know, there's many ways that people live a life, many kinds of families, lots of diverse ways that family looks. And I'm having my family of friends, or this is what I'm doing. Or you might say, if you wanted to say something like, well, it just didn't happen for me, and so then you say maybe something like, and so I'm making my family of friends. That wasn't my journey. So now, you know, you probably don't want to say anything that you feel is going to make people feel very sorry for you and ask tons of questions and stuff like that, and want to come from a position of strength, I think. But there is a way to slip in there if you want to communicate that this was hard. You know, you have to find something that fits with you. So I think it depends on the workplace. I think it takes practice. I think you can, you know, do some role play with a friend or somebody close to you and come up with something that feels right for you. And it may change over time. And it may be, you know what, you're going to have somebody sidle up to you at the water fountain whenever people go back to water fountains. And they're going to say something like, gee, you know, I went to the doctor last week, and people may share stuff. And you might decide that with somebody, you might be a bit more open, or they're probably going to think, oh my goodness, that Dina's so strong, nothing affects her. She just kind of you know, just seems to be so, manages all. And you might be happy, that might be fine. Or you might say, you know what, that's not true, and I want to be a little bit more vulnerable. It depends, you know. Sometimes in work situations, they have like retreats and things like that, right, where people bond and tell me something that we don't know about you, you know. And you know, it is a workplace, so you have to kind of use your own judgment about, you might want to share. Or you might want to go to human resources and say, you know, what are you all doing to help people pay for the huge costs in family building? You know, Resolve, the National Infertility Association, has a mission of advocacy, education, and support. And they do advocacy work all the time. And they have, and so does the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. But in any case, there is a way you can get involved in advocacy, and you can learn ways you can talk to your human resources about, you know, what kind of support do you have for people who are spending huge amounts of money on fertility treatment or fertility, you know. In your case, you had no doubt to pay an awful lot of money for what felt like just, I guess, like, you know, being invaded by fibroids, for heaven's sake. It wasn't like you were doing IVF, but it's still, somebody had to pay for it somewhere. So I think that it's important to feel strong. It's important to realize you have choices. It's important to realize that you can be empowered and you can talk about it from a place where you're not sweeping it under the rug and saying this is nothing, but you can say this is really something and it's really tough, but I'm carrying on. And more people need to know about all these other people that you're speaking for. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you all, by definition, you're strong enough to speak in public like this. So you might be like kind of leaders. You might want to speak up a little bit more. Or, you can insert it in a conversation. If somebody says something like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Well, just so you know, happy for your baby shower, but not everybody has a baby shower. Not everybody has a baby, and there's different roads. And let's just be inclusive. Or you might say, I'm mindful that there's going to be some people at this company that aren't going to be having any baby showers. Like we need to kind of be mindful that the sort of handing around the collection for the baby shower might be upsetting. There's a wonderful episode of Sex and the City where Carrie Bradshaw, I only saw part of it. I think she wants them all to give her a pair of shoes because she says she's spending money on their baby showers and their bridal showers and their children. And anyway, I mean, I don't know if you go that far, but it's nice. It was well received, I'm sure, by many people. Good point to be made, right? The three of you, by definition, because you're here talking about it, are probably people that I would be much less worried about. It's all the people that, as you say, are hidden and are in shame and things like that. So I can't even tell you, speaking up like this it's helpful for you and it's helpful for other people in ways that you may not even imagine. So, be good to yourselves and thank you.